Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Mobile App Bootstrap, custom mobile apps with embedded Tableau visualizations. I'll be your host today. I'm Ron Thies. I'm a software engineer at Tableau. I wrote a lot of the code that we're going to take a look at today, so I am really excited about this project. This is something that's near and dear to me. I've worked on mobile apps and games for a number of years now. I hope the Bootstrap can meet your needs. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to start with what the Bootstrap is, talk about what's changed, and then we're going to dive deep into the details of implementing not just a mobile app with Tableau visualizations, but some info on mobile apps in general. So we'll start super high level, but then dive deep as we go into more of the technical details. I'm also going to give away the ending. I'd like for you to walk out of here with some questions that you can take back home to ask folks back in your org. Sometimes these are kind of basic, like how would a mobile app connect to your internal network? How important is custom branding to your org? Do your users tend to use a few pretty well-known visualizations that you know ahead of time? Hey, these are the popular ones that they're actually going to want to use mainly. And notably, do we have the resources for this, be it either in-house or third-party programmers, and who would kind of wrangle this project long-term? You can publish an app, but there's a little bit of maintenance involved over time, and it's worth thinking about who would take up that mantle. This is a talk in the Tableau developer track. So most talks at Tableau discuss features of desktop or features of Tableau Server. The developer track talks discuss working outside of those frameworks, but leveraging desktop and server. So some talks talk about an automation or helping folks do data science integration, implementing custom data connectors, or adding extensions. We're talking about embedded analytics. So we'll discuss embedding visualizations inside of mobile apps. So in the developer platform, the delicious layer cake, we are going to talk about the frosting on the top today. So what the Bootstrap is, let's talk about what it isn't. So the mobile app Bootstrap is not Tableau Mobile. So Tableau Mobile is already available in the public app store. It's on iOS and Android. Lets you sign in to Tableau Server, take a look at your visualizations, interact with them. It's great. That's not the mobile app Bootstrap. This is also not the Tableau Mobile beta. So the beta is Tableau Mobile rewritten in React Native. It supports some great new stuff like interactive previews, project browsing, Touch ID if you want it. If you watched the devs on stage this morning, Alex presented this. She showed that off. There's a separate TC session later on today, the Tableau Mobile Rising. Two of the managers on Tableau Mobile will talk about it. They'll compare the current and the upcoming app. But honestly, if you want to see it in action, you can see it on your phone or tablet today. It's an open beta. If you come down to the kiosk in the expo hall, you can grab the download code and check it out for yourself if you like. So that's the Tableau Mobile beta. That is not the mobile app Bootstrap. The Bootstrap is a set of open source, it's an open source mobile app demonstrating how to embed Tableau visualizations inside. So open source, mobile app, embedded Tableau vizzes. Super basic sample app in a couple of different programming languages. They demonstrate very specific techniques. They aren't meant to show what you might actually ship to your customers, but meant to show the important parts that might be a little confusing without it. It's completely free for you to use or copy or just be inspired by. If you want to translate it into a different language, that's great. And because your users would sign into, you're connecting to Tableau Server as part of this, there's no special Tableau licensing or fees involved. There's nothing special for using the Bootstrap. The code is up at GitHub. It's at github.com/Tableau. And you own and maintain your own app. It's yours to decide, or apps. It's yours to choose what you do with. I do want to point out, so computer programming is required here. This is not, I think sometimes folks feel like, well, this is another option as part of Tableau Server. It is not. There is some programming required. So you've been forewarned. The genesis of the Bootstrap, so we had customers approach us with a number of different scenarios that kind of lent themselves to a custom mobile app. So customers who are running warehouses or grocery stores had this use case of someone walking through the store, they want to look at a particular visualization. They're always using the same visualization when they're walking around. Maybe they want to scan a barcode, so get info on a product, filter a viz based on that barcode. They're pretty interested in having that because they're wandering throughout the store. Similar use case for hospitals who place barcodes on equipment and sometimes on patient wristbands. They want to be able to scan a barcode, take a look at a viz with info filtered to that barcode. I am not in field sales, but this is what I imagine field sales is about. You run around on a soccer field somewhere and you're looking at like 2 different visualizations the whole time. Custom branding. So everybody wants custom branding. They want to dictate the color scheme in the app. They want to set their own app name. They want to customize the icon. It seems kind of silly, but the icon is kind of a big deal because it's what you see when you're looking at your phone, and everyone wants a custom one. They want it to match their organization. There really isn't a way for a public App Store app to enable that sort of customization. If you've got your own app, you can set the icon to whatever you want. Everyone wants integrated experiences. They want to present not just Tableau visualizations, but other info and data beside it. Maybe KPIs that they want everyone to be aware of, the latest announcements, but they want the visualizations to feel like a part of that experience. Some people approached us wanting to give super broad access. So they know that every employee in every retail store is going to look at the sales commissions viz at the end of every day. They want to make that easy to get to so the user isn't browsing through a number of vizzes on Tableau Server. They want to make it pretty straightforward. Kind of a similar use case is for the executives who might not appreciate all of the features that might be available to them. You only want to present them with the information that they need. So it's a surprisingly similar use case to the broad access one. Folks usually approach this from 2 different scenarios. Either they're starting completely from scratch, or they've got an existing mobile app that they want to modify and add Tableau visualizations into. The folks starting from scratch are pretty much open to any solution that works, but they also have, this is all new, so they come in with less mobile-specific knowledge. The folks who have an existing app generally have certain language requirements because the app is already written in a particular language. They already have an app person or team who is up to speed on these things, and therefore they have more mobile-specific knowledge because they're already shipping a mobile app. So what's available in the Bootstrap? There are 2 main platforms that we deal with, iOS and Android, and 2 main frameworks. So Objective-C, an app written in Objective-C, works on iOS only. It sadly does not run on Android. And we also have an example of the Bootstrap in React Native. So this works on both iOS and Android. The sample apps are meant to be super straightforward, super simple. They're just an overview with 3 different visualizations, and there's an example barcode scanner too. So out of the box, it looks something like this. We have 4 tabs along the bottom. The left-hand tab is just some basic general info. Each of the 3 other tabs links to a specific visualization that the app creator has chosen ahead of time. So if the user taps one of those buttons on the tabs, they get taken to a full-screen viz. Again, we have chosen this ahead of time. The barcode scanner is similarly straightforward. There are 2 tabs on the bottom. The left one is just for showing what the output of the camera, so you can scan a barcode. The right one shows this, again, predetermined viz that has now been filtered to just show information for that barcode. So what's changed in the Bootstrap? The big thing that's new is React Native. So we've got the Mobile App Bootstrap written in React Native. React Native is a cross-platform framework. It means your code runs on both iOS and Android. Your app is completely native, but it uses JavaScript and React to, you use JavaScript and React to lay things out and perform the logic in the app. These are pretty common web development technologies. React Native was created by Facebook. It was released a few years ago. It's completely open source. Anybody can contribute. Facebook tends to do most of the maintenance on it. They kind of ride herd, but you do get all the source when you use React Native. In fact, we investigated React Native about 1.5 years ago and decided to write the new version of the app in it, and it's been pretty good. It was a little bit of a risk at the time, but it's turned out great. We see about 99% code reuse, so if we write it once, we use it on both iOS and Android. We've also discovered that other web developers in the company, they're familiar with React already, and when they see our code, they instantly understand what's going on. So we've had them say, hey, I'm not a mobile developer, but I got 90% of what was going on in this code. So they've been able to make contributions to the app, which we were hoping for when we started out, and it turned out to be true. Similarly, our UX designer can make modifications himself. So he's using CSS to style things. All sorts of UX designers understand CSS as a way of styling, and that means he can iterate and change the app, tweak it. He doesn't need a programmer to use an interface builder set up inside of an IDE. He can make the changes himself, check things in, and that's worked out great. Some pretty well-known companies are using React Native. Here are some logos I pulled off of the React Native webpage. I will let you guess the logo. But it's seen some pretty good uptake. So what's old? We have deprecated the Mobile App Bootstrap Cordova flavor. Cordova historically has relied on WKWebView. We'll dig deeper into what WKWebView is in a little bit. That's been deprecated by Apple, but honestly, the core issue was the sort of WebView within a WebView setup that you have to use if you're trying to use Cordova. It was too painful. The customers who did try it out got super frustrated with it. It was not worth maintaining, and so we recommend the React Native platform instead if you want something that's cross-platform. The Objective-C samples now use WKWebView. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And the GitHub repos, they're all up under the Tableau project. If you search for mobile within the github.com/Tableau, you'll see all the code that's relevant. All right, let's dive a little deeper into authentication. Authentication is super boring, but it is also extremely important. And it's a big challenge. It's been a challenge for us historically. This year, we formed a 5-person team just focused on mobile authentication. That means that your app will have to deal with authentication one way or another, unless you're only connected to Tableau Public, but pretty much you're probably going to have to deal with authentication. So let's talk about it. So here's a super simple example of an app on the left on a mobile device connecting to Tableau Server on the right inside of the green jello of a private network. When the app wants to connect, it's a pretty straightforward connection. It can make the request from Tableau Server. Tableau Server authenticates the user, hands back the viz. Pretty straightforward. But what happens when this device is outside the firewall? Somebody is connecting from a coffee shop or a conference center. We have to authenticate that device before it can connect to Tableau Server. There are 2 main ways of doing that authentication. Reverse proxy is one. A virtual private network, or VPN, is the other. So the reverse proxy setup, our reverse proxy is this blue machine just inside the firewall. When the app tries to connect to Tableau Server, the reverse proxy intercepts the connection and authenticates the user. So it says, hey, I don't know who you are. Fill out this username, password, and maybe 2-factor authentication field. The app has to authenticate with the reverse proxy. Only once that's done will the reverse proxy allow that connection to continue to Tableau Server. As part of that authentication process, the reverse proxy gave the app a cookie to use in the future so that the next time it connects, the reverse proxy says, oh, I know who you are. I will pass you through to the Tableau Server. Tableau Server hands the viz back to the app, and the app can display it. Because the reverse proxy handed the app a cookie, the app has to make sure that that cookie is used in all future connections. So it means the app really has to be conscious of the fact that there's this reverse proxy in the way. The other main way of connecting is through a virtual private network. And in this, kind of at the operating system level, the operating system has taken care of that authentication already. So from an app's perspective, it winds up looking kind of like a straight shot to that Tableau server. So the OS has already handled the authentication. From an app's perspective, it can just connect to Tableau server, and that's all been taken care of. And when the response comes back, it can head right back to the device. A cloud connection is relatively straightforward. So if you're connecting to Tableau online, there generally isn't a firewall in the way. The Tableau server can just hand back the viz. So these diagrams are obviously simplified. So that purple arrow looks pretty easy. There's more complexity to it when the app has to sign in. So let's talk about that. This is kind of the user sign-in process that happens with Tableau Server, and we'll walk through this. So we've found good results just letting an in-app web view perform the authentication. And part of that is the Tableau Server hands back a username and password field. If you're using SAML, it might hand back another server's SAML setup. That web view can perform all of the post and redirect operations that it needs to. Once authentication is complete, server hands back a cookie with a session ID inside, and future connections to Tableau Server use that cookie to authenticate. So the Tableau Server sees that cookie come along with the viz request, says, oh, I understand who this user is. I know what their permissions are. They're OK to view this viz. Here's the viz back. So to use our earlier diagram and many more arrows, when the app first requests viz A, server doesn't know who this user is, hands back a username and password field. The user fills out that field, submits it to Tableau Server. Server hands back a cookie, which needs to be included later, along with viz A. When the app makes a request for another viz in the future, it includes the cookie. Tableau Server says, great, I know who you are, hands back viz B. This is not surprising. This is not an abnormal way to connect. Just about any web service you use that has stuff behind that requires authentication uses a very similar setup. You can tweak these settings if you have access to your server's YAML file. So by default, there is an idle limit on those session IDs. So if the user signs in, is inactive for more than, by default, 4 hours, and then comes back, their session will no longer be valid. Their cookie has crumbled, and they will have to sign back in again. You can also set a lifetime limit. If you set that bottom apply lifetime limit to true, then the session.lifetime limit parameter then that one comes into effect. The default there is 24 hours. So if someone goes on a viz viewing binge for 24 hours straight, then after that 24 hours, they will also have to sign back in again. So a default of 4 hours can feel kind of short to a mobile user, because you take a look at a viz at night, you put the phone down, you take a look at it in the morning, you have been signed out, and now you have to painfully sign back in again. For this, we have what we call connected clients. This is, if you're familiar with OAuth tokens, this will look very familiar. So this is a way of using long-lasting tokens to enable the user to stay signed in. So we start with the session ID that we got in the earlier process. Using that, the app can request a long-lived refresh token and a short-lived access token. The server hands those back. The app stores those tokens in its own storage. The goal here is if the user reboots their device, for instance, we want the app to be able to reload those tokens and just start using them right away rather than asking the user to sign in again. So the app stashes those tokens, and we set the web view up to use that short-lived access token when it makes viz requests. Once that token expires, the app can use the long-lived refresh token to request a new short-lived access token. It gets the new access token back, stores that token out so that it can use it later across reboots, and the WebView can continue using the new access token to make viz requests. We can tweak this on server also. The default connected client's expiration time is 14 days. So as long as the user signs in once every 2 weeks, they will not have to sign in again. This is the default. You can completely turn this off if you want, or you can set it really long. It's up to you. There's a similar lifetime expiration. This defaults to 1 year. So the user will have to sign in every year. You can turn this off if you want them to never have to sign in again. There are a couple of server-side settings you can make. So in the, I think it's in Settings General on server, you can uncheck connected clients if you would like to turn that off. Notably, both the mobile app and desktop use connected clients to keep the user signed in. So if you turn this off, that will also affect Tableau Desktop. These clients are listed on server, and both the server admin and users can go through and delete these. So if the user loses their phone, you can delete their tokens and make it so the next time that phone connects, the user has to re-authenticate. So once we are signed in, we want to be able to hand, for instance, a visualization off to a web view to display. What URL should we use? You will be tempted to use the URL in your browser's location bar. You want to instead use the URL in the share menu. So there's that little share button when you're looking at a viz, and it brings up a dialog that includes that link. That's actually the better URL to use if you want to embed or refer to a viz later on. Notably, it won't have the hashtag symbol inside it. It will also come with a number of query parameters tacked onto the end of the URL. Allow me to suggest that you research what those query parameters are so that you understand how your viz is being tweaked as you request it. You might find that you don't need all of them in your app, and you might find others that you want to add on too. It's also possible to request images of a viz. And the idea here is that by requesting an image, you can stash that image away for later use. So you could request 15 or 20 images, store those out in the app's documents area, and then let the user take a look at them when they're offline. You can do this by appending.png to any view URL. So normally we've got a view URL, looks like it ends in workbook name / view name. You just tack PNG on the end, you'll get an image. This works in any web browser, a desktop web browser, for instance, today. You can request the size, too. So if you know you want a particularly sized image, slap :size equals width, height. So if you specify 2000, 400, you will get a 2000 pixel wide PNG that is 400 high. There are some limits that might be enforced. So Tableau Server might say, well, I'm not going to hand you an image less than a certain size. Similarly, if you have designed your viz to force a certain size, then your image might not come back exactly at the size you've requested. Both images and embedded visualizations will use the correct layout. So if you have set up a phone layout or a tablet layout, the normal size to layout logic applies here. And this is, for those who aren't familiar, this is based on the smallest of the height and width that is sent to server. So if it's smaller than 500 pixels, either high or wide, you'll get the phone layout. Between 501 and 800, you get the tablet. Above 801, you get the desktop layout. This is sent, that's the parameter that's sent by the PNG, and it's sent in an automated way. If you've got a web view that's requesting a viz, you don't have to specify that there. It'll just understand, oh, here's how much space I've taken, so that it'll use the correct layout for that. So we use web views pretty extensively in the app. They're used for both authentication and for displaying visualizations. On Android, the default web view works fine. We don't really have problems with that. iOS has two different web view flavors: the older UI web view and the newer WK or WebKit web view. And it's worth looking at the differences between these two, because UI WebView has some serious problems. It uses a ton of memory. It has some JavaScript incompatibilities, so it looks like a web browser that's several years old. It has a tendency to crash at pretty much the worst times. And if you're trying to look at a complex visualization, it will often fail in strange ways. So I've seen visualizations that are fairly complex, but you start looking at them in a UI WebView, scroll a little bit, and then the whole thing crashes. Show the same one in a WKWebView, and it works fine. UI WebView is going to be going away at some point. Apple has marked it as deprecated. We don't know when it will disappear, but it will at some point. Instead, we suggest using the newer WKWebView, the WebKit WebView. It does use less memory. It acts like a modern browser. It's the same engine that Safari is on a phone or on tablet. It is less crashy, and Apple actually maintains it. Notably, in iOS 11, cookie reads and writes were made a lot easier. Prior to this, it was kind of a hack to get cookie reading and writing going with WKWebView. It's a lot easier in iOS 11. In short, switching from UI WebView to WKWebView will solve problems. I've talked with customers who started to use UI WebView. They were having issues with weirdo memory usage, and vizzes aren't displaying the way they should be showing, and sometimes black or blank screens would show up where a viz is supposed to be. Once we helped them switch to WKWebView, those problems went away. It's worth thinking about what your organization's device needs are. So do you mainly have devices owned by the org, or can anybody bring any device? Is it bring your own device? Is it mainly tablets? Is it mainly phones? Are most folks on iOS or most folks on Android? This is worth thinking about as you look at making a custom app. I would suggest declaring iOS 11 as the minimum version if you're going to ship on iOS, which most of you probably are. It does enable that WKWebView cookie reading and writing. It also just reduces the total surface area that you have to support. It reduces the variables that you have to test for. For the Tableau Mobile beta, it also has a minimum of iOS 11. Historically, at Tableau, we have supported the current version of iOS and the one previous. So that'll apply once Tableau Mobile ships. We'll support iOS 12 and iOS 11. And this is borne out by the statistics that we see. So these are usage stats on Tableau Mobile by operating system version. So at the top, we've got Android. At the bottom is iOS. You can see Android is pretty stable. Like, folks, this is the last couple of months or so. People don't tend to really change what OS version they're on. Whereas on iOS, you can pretty much see when iOS 12 was released, and people will pick it up pretty fast. Here's the same info, but shown with bars. You can see most of the numbers on the right, which are iOS, are 11 and 12 versions. So it's worth setting iOS 11 at the minimum. I've been showing a lot of phone screenshots here. It works great on tablet too. It's just easier to include phone screenshots in a presentation. Device Designer works great with the Mobile App Bootstrap. You'll want to make sure that any visualizations you're going to show in an embedded way are set up with the phone layouts that you want. There are a couple good TC sessions. On the Road Again has Carolina and Phil talking about Device Designer and the nitty-gritty of that. That's worth going to. And the mobile dashboards session is also worthwhile. It's also worth thinking about locking your app's orientation. It cuts down on your possible design spaces when you're making vizzes if you know that phone users will always be in portrait, for example. You can set your app so that if the user rotates their device, your app orientation doesn't change, and that's worth thinking about. So maybe landscape for tablets and portrait for phones. It'll reduce your headaches later on as you stare at Device Designer and try to think, okay, if they're on phone but then they rotate to landscape, do I have to think about that? If you don't have to think about it, it makes things easier. All right, let's talk about kind of more general, less Bootstrap specific and more mobile app delivery specific. So Apple has two main developer programs. The really common one that you tend to hear about is for folks who are distributing an app to the public. And this is really made for, it's relatively inexpensive. You can only distribute your app to 100 devices that you have named ahead of time, because the idea is these are just testing devices, and you're going to ship it far and wide on the public app store. That's how most developers have things set up. But that doesn't really match with your scenario, because you want to ship your app not on the public app store, but only in-house. For this, Apple has their enterprise distribution program. It's a little more expensive. There's a little more vetting by Apple. But once you're in the enterprise program, you can ship as many apps as you want to as many people as you want within your organization. It means if you want to experiment with things, that's fine. If you can send it to anybody. They don't have to sign up ahead of time. It makes it a lot easier, and it's worth investigating. On Android, things are much different. You can pretty much do whatever you want. I was going to write down the specifics of exactly how it works, but honestly, it's do whatever you want. That's kind of their philosophy. If you have a mobile device management system or an MDM system, they can automatically push your app down to your users' devices. So the user does not have to update the app when you've got an update you want them to have. You can mandate that everybody is on the latest version as of right now. You can also set it up so that certain users have certain versions of the app. If you have a test audience, it's mobile device management systems. Some examples include AirWatch or Mobile Iron, Citrix Zen Mobile, or BlackBerry. There's a separate TC session called Deploy and Enjoy that talks a little more about managing mobile in an enterprise. These MDM systems can also send metadata along with the app down to the device. And you can set it up so that everybody has the same app, but certain groups get metadata that is slightly different from other groups. Your app can then look for that metadata and change its behavior based on that. So the Tableau Mobile in the public app store does something a lot like this. So its normal sign-in screen has a server name field and a big Connect to Tableau Online button. If the metadata that's sent down to it specifies this, it can add some custom servers below the sign-in, the normal sign-in area. And it can even request that the server name field and the Tableau Online button are completely removed, and instead users just have a couple of main buttons. You can do something similar if you want your sales team to have access to a couple of different visualizations, but you want your IT team to have access to those and a few other visualizations too. You can set this up through mobile device management systems. They can push down these app config variables. You can set up some analytics in your app. They return kind of by default some pretty basic info, like the version of the app and the operating system, how long your users are using your app. But you can also track specific actions taken inside the app if you want to see how often the users tap certain buttons or do certain things. If your marketing team might already have an analytics solution for your website, often these web analytics solutions also have mobile components too. So if you already have a relationship with those folks, you already have people versed in how that data is prepared, it's worth investigating. If not, search for mobile analytics in your favorite search engine. All sorts of options will pop up. Google, Amazon, and Yahoo all have their own packages. And some of these convert to Tableau data sources more easily than others. So they're worth investigating as you're taking a look at analytics packages. To support your app, we have had good experiences using this setup called Intercom. So Intercom puts this little button in the lower right there for users. And when users tap it, they are taken to a separate window that includes communications from us. We didn't want to have to write this whole windowing system and make sure that Jim's picture is in the right spot. We didn't want to have to do that ourselves. So we integrated Intercom with a few lines of code. And now we have this messaging system that is inside the app. It lets you do both one-way messaging, so you can blast a message out to everyone who has the latest version and is using an Android tablet, or any sort of setup like that. We have also elected to use two-way messaging. So there's a way for users to respond to us on the bottom. You can use this if folks need help If they're looking at a viz, they'd like more info on the viz. Hey, is this using the latest data? This is worth checking out. It's at intercom.com. So you know now what devices your users use. The trick is, how do you test on those devices? One way to go is to buy a crate full of devices, set them up in a closet, and try to keep them updated separately. Another way to go is to outsource this and use a device farm that someone else maintains that you basically rent the use of. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft all offer these solutions. Some other companies do too. But the idea is that you choose, you say, hey, here's my app. I want it to run on these particular devices. And then it goes off and runs. Once it's done, you get some info back on, did the app run? Did it crash? What did it look like when it was running? You can have it take screenshots. So if you want to quickly see how your app looks on 100 different devices, you can do it. It keeps you from maintaining a closet full of hardware constantly. All right, to wrap up, what's next for the Bootstrap? So we're going to add, the plan is to add a couple more languages. Swift is the next one on the list. We'd like to go deeper and show how to request and then store those offline snapshots, how to handle re-authentication, some of the debugging techniques that we use in-house. We'd like to help show those. And that 5-person team that's just focused on mobile authentication, they've talked extensively about taking the authentication library they're developing and releasing that on GitHub. That's kind of the goal for them, and the use case of, hey, someone's building their own app with the Bootstrap and they want to use our library, that's a use case they keep in mind. You, customer, play an important role in the priorities of the Mobile App Bootstrap. If you are using or are thinking about using the Bootstrap, allow me to suggest that you get in touch with us. Let us know early on in the process, and we can help save you some headaches later on. Often we only find out that someone is even using the Bootstrap when there's a crisis. And often that makes things a lot more challenging. If we had known earlier, maybe we could have helped. Contact your friendly neighborhood salesperson. We have a great relationship with the sales team. They know how to get in touch with us and bring the right resources along. So it's worth, if you're thinking about this, it's worth having that conversation early so that we can help. So those questions to consider. It's worth thinking about, how would your app connect to Tableau Server? Do your users mainly use a few well-known visualizations? And then really, where would the resources come from, either in-house or out-of-house, and who would manage this long-term? I am legally required to ask you to fill out the session survey in your TC18 app. Conference veterans know that this is how you influence what's shown at conference. Even if you don't want to give the session a score, typing some comments in the comments field would be a huge help. I get to see them in an anonymized way. I would personally appreciate your feedback. There's some great embedded analytics sessions that are worth looking at, a deep dive into the JavaScript API. I am skeptical you can build a portal in 60 minutes or less, but apparently you can. There's some great mobile sessions too, so the device designer session with Carolina and Phil and the mobile dashboard design session are worthwhile. If you'd like to see the Tableau Mobile, how to distribute that kind of in your enterprise, that's worth attending. And Tableau Mobile Rising is the deep dive into the new Tableau Mobile beta and comparing it with the current app. There's some great dev track content up at the URL shown here. The developer program has some new features. If you haven't signed up, it includes a mini site of your own on Tableau Online. That is worth checking out. And then the GitHub URL is just github.com/Tableau. So that's about it for me. I'm happy to take questions up here afterwards if anyone's interested. I will also head down to the developer kiosk. I'll be there for the next couple hours, maybe after I get lunch. But I'll be there if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics. With that, thank you very much.